She stood trembling in her wedding dress, left behind in front of everyone, until a quiet ranch hand stepped forward and gently took her hand. As he led her away from the wreckage of her vows, folks couldn't help but ask what makes a man risk everything for a woman who wasn't meant to be his. The white dress trails behind her like a ghost of what should have been. Calla Briar stands alone at the altar of Cedar Creek's only church, her bouquet of wild flowers trembling in hands that won't stop shaking. The morning sun streams through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across her veil, a veil that was supposed to frame her face as she became Mrs. Jonathan Hayes, not shroud her humiliation before half the county. The whispers start low, like the distant rumble of thunder before a storm. Where is he? Someone murmurs from the packed pews. Jonathan wouldn't just leave. But the empty space beside her tells a different story. The groom's chair sits vacant, his boutonniere wilted on the altar steps where someone dropped it in haste. Her father, Thomas Briar, stands frozen halfway down the aisle, his weathered rancher's hands clenched into fists. He'd walked her halfway to her future before they both realized there was no one waiting to claim it. The shame in his eyes cuts deeper than any wound, not shame for her, but for the man who promised to love his daughter and vanished like morning mist. From the back of the church, a figure moves quietly along the wall. Elias Venn wasn't supposed to be here at all. He'd come to deliver the horses that were meant to pull the wedding carriage, nothing more. His dark eyes take in the scene with the careful observation of a man who's learned to read trouble before it finds him. He's tall and lean, with hands that speak of honest work, and a face that suggests he's carried more than his share of life's burdens. The church door creaks open, and everyone's head turns with desperate hope. But it's only the wind, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of rain. No Jonathan, no explanations, no apologies, just a bride, standing alone in a dress that suddenly feels like a costume for a play she never auditioned for. Calla lifts her chin, a gesture inherited from generations of Briar women who faced down drought, rustlers, and broken dreams with equal determination. She takes one step back from the altar, then another, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like a countdown to nowhere. The wedding is postponed, she announces, her voice carrying more strength than she feels. Indefinitely. The murmur of the crowd rises like a wave, but Calla doesn't stay to hear their pity or their speculation. She gathers her skirts and walks back down that aisle not as a bride, but as a woman who's just learned the difference between a promise and a lie. Outside, storm clouds gather on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnies softly, as if calling her home to a life she hasn't imagined yet. What would you have done if you saw a bride abandoned at the altar? Let us know in the comments below. Hours pass like years. The wedding guests have long since dispersed, taking their casseroles and their sympathetic looks back to their own homes and their own troubles. The church stands empty now, its doors closed against the approaching storm, but Calla hasn't gone inside the ranch house where her family waits with careful faces and careful words. Instead, she finds herself walking the familiar paths of her father's land, her wedding dress gathering dust and burrs with each step. The silk that cost 3 months of her teaching salary now drags through the dirt, like any other piece of cloth. No longer precious, no longer special. The horse barn beckons a refuge of honest smells and simple truths. Here, at least, creatures mean what they say and say what they mean. A horse either trusts you or doesn't. It either carries you safely or throws you off. There are no false promises in the language of animals, no pretty words that turn to ash in your mouth. She pushes open the heavy wooden door and steps into the dim coolness, her eyes adjusting to the golden light that filters through the hayloft windows. That's when she sees him, Elias Venn, the quiet man from the church, methodically brushing down a beautiful chestnut mare with movements so gentle they seem like a prayer. He doesn't look up when she enters, doesn't acknowledge her presence with words or even a glance. But something in his posture shifts, a subtle recognition that he's no longer alone. The mare stamps softly and turns her head toward Kala, brown eyes curious and unafraid. Kala sinks onto a hay bale, her dress pooling around her like spilled cream. The silence between them isn't uncomfortable, it's necessary, like the space between musical notes that makes the melody possible. She watches his hands work, strong and sure, treating the animal with a respect that borders on reverence. "She's beautiful," Kala finally says, her voice hoarse from holding back tears she refuses to shed in public. Elias nods, still focused on his task. "Name's Luna," he says simply. "Brought her up from Texas. She's got good bloodlines, good temperament." He pauses, stroking the mare's neck, knows her own worth. The words hang in the air between them, and Kala wonders if he's talking about the horse or something else entirely. She pulls her knees up to her chest, mindful of the expensive fabric that no longer matters, and watches this stranger care for an animal with more tenderness than her fiancé had shown her in 2 years of courtship. The storm that's been threatening all day finally arrives, rattling the barn roof with the first fat drops of rain. Thunder rolls across the prairie like God clearing his throat, and lightning illuminates the windows in brief, brilliant flashes. Without a word, Elias shrugs out of his worn leather jacket and drapes it over her shoulders. It smells of sage and saddle soap, and something indefinably masculine that makes her feel protected rather than trapped. He returns to his work, giving her the gift of his continued silence, the space to exist without having to explain or apologize or pretend. The rain comes down like judgment, drumming against the barn roof with a fury that matches the chaos in Kala's heart. What started as scattered drops has become a deluge, turning the dusty ranch yard into a muddy lake and making any thought of returning to the house impossible. Not that Kala wants to face the well-meaning sympathy waiting for her there. The cups of tea, the gentle questions, the careful way everyone will avoid mentioning Jonathan's name. Lightning splits the sky, illuminating the barn in stark black and white. And in that moment of brightness, Kala sees herself as if from a great distance, a woman in a ruined wedding dress, sitting in a barn with a stranger, watching her future wash away with the storm. "I thought I knew what love was supposed to feel like," she says suddenly, the words pulled from her by the raw honesty of the storm. Elias continues grooming Luna, but she can tell he's listening by the way his movements slow to become more deliberate. "I thought it was supposed to make your heart race and your hands shake," she continues, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I thought it was supposed to consume you, change you, make you willing to give up everything for just one more day with that person." She laughs, but there's no humor in the sound. "Jonathan never made my heart race. He was safe, predictable, the kind of man my father approved of, and my friends envied me for catching. But he never made me feel alive." Thunder crashes overhead, so close it seems to shake the very bones of the barn. Luna startles slightly, but Elias's steady hand on her neck calms her immediately. He moves to a dry corner of the barn and begins spreading fresh hay, his actions speaking louder than any words of comfort. "Maybe that's why he ran," Kala whispers. "Maybe he knew I was settling for safe instead of reaching for something real." Without ceremony, Elias pulls a horse blanket from a nearby peg and shakes it out, creating a makeshift wall between her corner and the rest of the barn. It's not about propriety. It's about giving her a space to fall apart without an audience, even an audience of one. He builds up the small brazier that keeps the barn warm on cold nights, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of wood smoke mingles with hay and leather, creating something that feels like home in a way her actual home never has. "Sometimes," Elias says, his voice low and rough from disuse, "the storm has to wash everything away before you can see what was really there all along." As if summoned by his words, another crack of thunder shakes the world, and the lights in the ranch house flicker and die. They're alone now in their circle of firelight. Two souls taking shelter from more than just the weather. Calla pulls his jacket tighter around her shoulders and watches the flames dance. For the first time since standing at that altar, she doesn't feel like she's drowning. The storm rages on outside, but in this small pocket of warmth and understanding, she begins to breathe again. Dawn breaks gray and uncertain, the storm having passed but leaving the world muddy and changed. Calla wakes to find herself covered with another horse blanket, Elias nowhere to be seen but the barn filled with the soft sounds of morning chores. Her wedding dress is wrinkled beyond repair. Her hair escaped from its careful arrangement, and she's fairly certain she's never looked less like the proper young lady her mother raised her to be. The barn door slides open with a screech of protest, and her younger sister Margaret appears, her face a mixture of relief and scandal. "Calla, Mother's been beside herself. When you didn't come home last night." She trails off, taking in the hay and Calla's hair, the man's jacket around her shoulders. The intimate domestic scene of two people who've shared a space through the dark hours. "It's not what it looks like," Calla starts, but Margaret's expression suggests it doesn't matter what it actually was, only what it appears to be. Word travels fast in a small town. Faster still when it involves a jilted bride and a mysterious stranger. By the time Calla makes her way back to the house, she can feel the weight of watching eyes from neighboring windows, the rustle of curtains quickly drawn closed, the whispered conversations that stop when she passes. At the general store that afternoon, Mrs. Henderson makes a point of asking loudly about that young man staying in the barn, while Mr. Peterson suddenly finds urgent business elsewhere when Calla approaches the counter. The message is clear. Her reputation, already wounded by Jonathan's abandonment, is now hanging by a thread. It's then that Jonathan chooses to return. He appears at the ranch house door, just as Calla is hanging her ruined wedding dress on the line, not to preserve it, but to let the wind and sun finish what the storm started. His clothes are rumpled, his face unshaven, and he has the look of a man who's spent 2 days realizing he's made a terrible mistake. "Calla," he begins, his voice carrying all the charm that once made her think he might be enough. "I can explain. I got scared, started thinking about all the responsibility, all the changes, but I've come to my senses. We can still—" He stops mid-sentence as Elias emerges from the barn, moving with that quiet confidence that seems to fill whatever space he occupies. There's no confrontation, no angry words or dramatic gestures. Elias simply positions himself where he can see both Calla and Jonathan, his presence a silent statement that she's not alone anymore. Jonathan's eyes dart between them, taking in the familiarity of their positioning, the way Calla doesn't immediately rush to his side with forgiveness and relief. "I see," he says, his voice turning cold. "Didn't take you long to find comfort elsewhere." The accusation hangs in the air like smoke, ugly and staining. But before Calla can respond, before she can explain or defend or apologize, Elias steps forward. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't make threats or demands. He simply says, "She deserves better than someone who runs when things get real." Jonathan's face flushes red, but something in Elias's quiet certainty stops him from pushing further. He adjusts his hat, gathering whatever dignity he has left. "You'll regret this, Calla, both of you." But as Calla watches him ride away for the second time in 3 days, she realizes the only thing she regrets is not seeing clearly sooner. 3 weeks pass before Calla stops looking over her shoulder for Jonathan's return. In that time, something shifts between her and the quiet man who's taken up residence in their barn. It starts with small things: Elias appearing with coffee when she's feeding the chickens at dawn, Calla bringing him fresh biscuits still warm from the oven. Her father Thomas begins assigning them tasks that naturally put them in the same places: mending the fence line that borders Miller's Creek, checking the cattle in the north pasture, preparing the horses for the autumn roundup. They work side by side in a companionable silence that feels more intimate than all of Jonathan's pretty speeches ever had. Elias doesn't try to fill every quiet moment with meaningless chatter. Instead, he seems to understand that some of life's most important conversations happen without words at all. It's while stringing new wire along the creek fence that Calla begins to laugh again, really laugh. Not the polite tittering she'd perfected for social occasions. Elias is trying to hold a stubborn fence post steady while she twists the wire tight, but the post has other ideas, springing back and nearly knocking them both into the creek. "This post has more fight in it than most men I know," she gasps between giggles, and Elias's mouth quirks up in what might be the beginning of a smile. "Good thing you know how to handle stubborn creatures," he replies, and the gentle teasing in his voice makes her heart skip in a way that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. The accident happens on a Tuesday, swift and sharp, as these things always are. Calla is walking backward, checking the tension on a section of wire they've just installed, when her foot finds the one rusty nail that's worked its way up through the wooden walkway over the creek. Pain shoots through her boot and up her leg, bright and immediate. She doesn't cry out. Briar women are raised tougher than that, but the way she suddenly stops moving, the sharp intake of breath, tells Elias everything he needs to know. He's beside her in an instant, his strong hands steadying her as she lifts her foot to assess the damage. "How bad?" he asks, his voice tight with concern. "Bad enough," she admits, and without another word, he scoops her up in his arms like she weighs no more than a sack of grain. The walk back to the house takes 15 minutes, and in that time, Calla becomes aware of things she's never noticed before. The way Elias smells like sage and honest work, the solid strength of his chest against her cheek, the careful way he adjusts his grip to make sure she's comfortable. There's nothing improper about it, nothing that would give the gossips more ammunition, but there's an intimacy in being carried that goes beyond the merely physical. Dr. Morrison cleans and bandages the wound, pronouncing it painful but not serious, and prescribes rest and elevation for the next few days. As Calla settles into the porch swing with her foot propped up, Elias brings her a cup of tea and settles into the chair beside her. For a long moment, they watch the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Then, quietly, as if he's been thinking about it for some time, Elias speaks. "You don't have to go back to anything that broke you," he says simply. "Sometimes starting over is the only way forward." The confession comes 3 days later, while Calla's foot is still healing and she's trapped on the porch like a bird with a broken wing. She's been watching Elias work with the horses, noting the way he seems to understand them on some deeper level, when she notices the leather satchel he keeps in his bedroll. It's old, worn smooth by years of handling, and tied with a piece of rawhide that suggests whatever's inside is precious enough to protect, but too painful to look at often. "You weren't always a ranch hand," she says when he brings her lunch, the words more statement than question. Elias pauses in the doorway, his hand tightening slightly on the plate he's carrying. For a moment, she thinks he won't answer, that he'll retreat back into the silence that seems to be his natural habitat. But then he sets the plate down and takes the chair beside her, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "My father was a preacher," he says finally. "Small town in Missouri, not much different from this one. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, said I had a gift for bringing people comfort." His laugh is dry, humorless, seems like a lifetime ago. Calla waits, sensing there's more beneath the surface, like water running deep underground. "I was engaged to a girl named Sarah," he continues, his voice growing softer. "Sweet as summer honey, with a laugh that could make you believe the world was good just because she was in it. We were going to be married right after I finished seminary, going to take over her father's church in Kansas." The past tense hangs heavy between them, loaded with all the weight of dreams that died before they could bloom. War came, Elias says simply, and Kala understands without needing details. The war between the states had reached into every corner of America, taking young men and sending back strangers wearing their faces. When I came home, he stops, runs a hand through his dark hair. Sarah tried. God knows she tried. But I wasn't the same man who'd left her. I'd seen things, done things. The words that used to come so easy when I preached, they just dried up in my throat like dust. That evening, while Elias is tending to the horses, Kala finds herself alone with his satchel. She knows she shouldn't look, knows that some secrets are kept private for good reason. But curiosity and something deeper, a need to understand this man who's becoming so important to her, overrides her better judgment. Inside, she finds a sketchbook filled with drawings that take her breath away. They're not the rough sketches of an amateur, but the careful work of someone with real talent. Page after page shows scenes of a life that might have been a small church, with sunlight streaming through simple windows, a woman in a wedding dress laughing as she feeds chickens, children playing in a garden while their parents watch from a porch swing. The woman in the drawings has Sarah's face. Kala can tell, because Elias has written her name in careful script beneath one of the portraits. But as she flips through more pages, she realizes something that makes her heart race. The later drawings, the ones that seem more recent, show a different woman. A woman with her own face, her own hands, her own smile. She's still holding the sketchbook when Elias returns, and the look on his face when he sees it tells her everything she needs to know about how precious and private those drawings are. "I'm sorry," she begins, but he just shakes his head. "Don't be sorry for wanting to understand," he says quietly. "Just know that some dreams die hard, even when new ones start growing in their place." That night, Kala can't sleep. The house is quiet around her. Her parents long since retired, but her mind won't stop turning over everything she's learned about Elias, everything she's discovered about herself in these weeks since her almost wedding. She rises from her bed and makes her way to the kitchen, where she lights a single candle and sits down at the worn wooden table, where her mother kneads bread and her father tallies ranch accounts. The blank paper stares up at her, white and expectant, and after a long moment, she picks up her pen and begins to write. "Dear Jonathan, by the time you read this, if you ever read this, you'll probably think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. Maybe standing at that altar, waiting for you to appear, finally broke something in me that needed breaking." The words flow easier than she expected. Years of unsaid thoughts and swallowed disappointments pouring onto the page like water through a broken dam. "I keep thinking about that morning, about the way I felt when I realized you weren't coming. I expected to feel heartbroken, devastated, destroyed. Instead, what I felt was relief. Not because you were gone, but because I finally had permission to stop pretending that what we had was enough." She pauses, her pen hovering over the paper, as she searches for the right words to explain what she's only just beginning to understand herself. "You weren't wrong to run, Jonathan. We both knew we were settling for safe instead of reaching for real. You were the kind of man I thought I should want, and I was the kind of woman you thought you should marry. But neither of us was brave enough to admit we were trying to build a life on a foundation of should instead of must." The candle flickers as a breeze finds its way under the kitchen door, and Kala looks up to see a shadow moving past the window. Elias, making his final rounds, checking on the horses before settling in for the night. The sight of him, solid and dependable and quietly devoted to the work of caring for living things, makes her heart squeeze with something she's beginning to recognize as love. "I met someone," she writes, the admission both thrilling and terrifying to put into words. "Someone who doesn't try to change me or fix me or make me into the woman he thinks I should be. Someone who sees the person I actually am and doesn't find her lacking." She tells Jonathan about the storm, about waking up in the barn covered with horse blankets, about the way Elias carries himself, like a man who's learned to be careful with precious things. She writes about laughter and silence, and the feeling of being truly seen for the first time in her life. "I won't mail this letter," she concludes. "It's not really for you anyway, it's for me." A way of closing a door that should have been closed long ago, a way of saying goodbye to the woman who would have married you and thank you to the woman who didn't. She signs it simply, folds it carefully, and slips it into her pocket. The next evening she finds Elias by the creek, watching the water flow over the stones in the fading light. Without explanation, she pulls out the letter and reads it aloud, her voice steady and clear in the gathering darkness. When she finishes, he's quiet for a long moment. Then he reaches over and takes her hand, the first time he's touched her with anything approaching romance, and says simply, "Now you're free." The letter goes into the fire that night, its ashes mingling with wood smoke and rising into a sky full of stars that seem closer and brighter than they ever have before. October arrives with a symphony of gold and red. The cottonwoods along Miller's Creek putting on their finest show before winter strips them bare. The Harvest Festival is in full swing in town, and for the first time since her almost wedding, Calla feels ready to face the curious looks and careful questions of her neighbors. She's different now. She can see it in the mirror, feel it in the way she moves through the world. The woman who almost married Jonathan Hayes was careful, cautious, always second-guessing herself. This new version of Calla Breyer knows her own mind and isn't afraid to speak it. Elias has been working on something in secret, she knows. She catches glimpses of him bent over his workbench in the evenings, his hands busy with some project he covers with canvas whenever she approaches. It's not suspicious, exactly, but it's private in the way that suggests something important is taking shape. The truth reveals itself on a crisp Saturday morning, when she finds him waiting by the porch with something wrapped in soft leather. His usual quiet confidence seems shaded with nervousness, and when he unwraps his gift, she understands why. It's a bracelet, but not the delicate, decorative kind that wealthy ladies wear to show off their husband's success. This is something altogether different, a horseshoe, carefully shaped and polished until it gleams like silver, with intricate designs etched into the metal that speak of hours of patient work. "Horseshoe's supposed to be lucky," he says, his voice rough with something that might be hope or fear or both, "though I figure you make your own luck mostly." She turns the bracelet over in her hands, admiring the craftsmanship, the way he's transformed something purely practical into something beautiful. But it's the symbolism that takes her breath away. A horseshoe, yes, but more than that. A circle with no beginning and no end, strong enough to bear weight, flexible enough to bend without breaking. "Elias," she begins, but he's not finished. "I'm not good with fancy words," he says, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that makes her pulse skip. "Never have been, probably never will be. But I know what I see when I look at you, and I know what I feel when you're not around." He takes the bracelet from her hands and, with infinite gentleness, fastens it around her wrist. The metal is warm from his touch, and she can feel the careful smoothness of every etched line. "If you stay," he says simply, "I'll build whatever you want. Won't be fancy, probably won't be easy, but it'll be real. It'll be ours. No kneeling, no grand speeches, no promises about forever that neither of them is naive enough to believe can be guaranteed. Just a quiet man offering to build a life with a woman who's learned the difference between settling and choosing." Calla looks down at the bracelet on her wrist, then up into Elias's dark eyes and smiles. Not the careful, practiced smile she used to wear for social occasions, but the real thing, bright and unguarded and full of possibility. "I'll stay," she says, and watches something that might be relief or joy or simple gratitude pass across his weathered features. They don't kiss, don't embrace, don't make a show of their commitment. Instead, they sit together on the porch swing, watching the morning sun climb higher over the prairie, and begin making quiet plans for the life they'll build together, one honest day at a time. 6 months later, when the prairie grass is green again and the creek runs high with snowmelt, Kala wakes before dawn on what will be her wedding day. There's no white dress hanging in her wardrobe, no church full of expectant guests, no elaborate plans for flowers and music and celebration. Instead, there's something better, the quiet certainty that today she'll marry a man who knows her completely and loves her anyway. She dresses in her best riding clothes, practical and comfortable, and braids wildflowers into her hair, not because tradition demands it, but because the yellow blooms make her feel like spring personified. When she looks in the mirror, she sees not a bride trying to transform herself into someone else's vision of perfection, but simply Kala, ready to begin the next chapter of her story. Elias is waiting for her by the creek, 2 horses saddled and ready, 2 tin cups of coffee steaming in the cool morning air. He's shaved and put on his best shirt, but he's still fundamentally himself, quiet, steady, real in a way that makes her heart sing. "Morning, Mrs. Venn," he says softly, offering her one of the cups, and she laughs at the presumption even as warmth spreads through her chest at the sound of her new name. "We're not married yet," she points out, accepting the coffee and breathing in its rich aroma. "Figured we are in all the ways that matter," he replies, and she realizes he's right. The vows they've made to each other haven't needed words or witnesses. They've been spoken in shared silences, in the way he brings her coffee every morning, in the way she saves him the last biscuit at every meal. They ride out together as the sun climbs higher, their horses moving at an easy pace across land that feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. The justice of the peace from the county seat is waiting at the old oak tree by Miller's Bend, Thomas Breyer's idea, a compromise between the completely private ceremony they wanted and the legal formalities that propriety demands. Judge Williams is a practical man who's performed dozens of frontier weddings, but even he seems moved by the quiet intensity of the moment. There are no attendants, no music, no elaborate ceremony, just 2 people who've chosen each other, standing beneath a tree that's witnessed decades of seasons and survived every storm the prairie could throw at it. "Do you, Elias Venn, take this woman to be your wife?" Judge Williams asks, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "I do," Elias says simply, his eyes never leaving Kala's face. "And do you, Kala Breyer, take this man to be your husband?" She thinks about the woman who stood at a different altar 6 months ago, waiting for a man who never came, thinking she knew what love was supposed to feel like. That woman seems like a stranger now, someone she might have pitied but wouldn't have recognized as herself. "I do," she says, and means it with every fiber of her being. They exchange simple gold bands, not because they need symbols to remember their commitment, but because sometimes the traditional gestures carry their own quiet power. When Judge Williams pronounces them husband and wife, they don't seal the moment with a dramatic kiss. Instead, they look at each other and smile. And somehow that feels more intimate and more permanent than any theatrical display could have been. The ride back to the ranch is peaceful, companionable, marked by the easy silence that's become their signature. They're married now, legally and completely, but nothing feels different because everything important changed long before they spoke their vows. That evening, as they sit on the porch, watching the sunset over land that belongs to both of them now, Kala thinks about the journey that brought her here, from abandoned bride to willing wife, from settling for safety to choosing real. "Some promises are louder when spoken in silence," she says softly, and Elias nods, understanding exactly what she means. In the distance, the horses they've raised together graze peacefully in the gathering dusk, and somewhere a nightbird calls to its mate. Tomorrow they'll wake up as husband and wife and begin the quiet work of building a life together, one honest day at a time. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected love, and second chances. You won't want to miss what happens in our next video.